The night air hung heavy over the quiet plains of Willow Creek, a small American village tucked between dusty ridges and the endless whisper of prairie grass. The year was 1887, and though the railroad had reached the next county, time here still moved slow, like the river that curved behind the churchyard, glinting under the half-moon. The village slept under the faint hum of crickets, unaware that behind the old barn at the edge of town, a man and woman were standing too close. Caught between love and guilt, he was a cowboy by all that meant. A ranch hand, sunburned and scarred, with dust clinging to his boots and a ring on his left hand that had dulled with time. That ring had once meant something unshakable. Now it felt like a shackle. He had spent years tending to cattle, fixing fences and mending a home that no longer felt alive. Inside him was a silence heavier than any storm, a silence that only she, the woman before him, seemed to understand. She wasn't from Willow Creek. Folks said she'd come down from the northern hills, where her family had a cabin and stories older than the town itself. She moved like she'd seen too much but carried it quietly, her eyes both soft and sharp in the same breath. The people in town didn't trust her. Some whispered she was trouble, others said she was lonely. But to the cowboy she was something else entirely, a reminder that his heart still knew how to ache. "Take it off if you love me," she said, her voice breaking the night in a whisper too fragile for the wind to steal. He froze. Her words hit him deeper than she knew. The way she said it wasn't cruel. It was almost pleading. She wasn't talking about his hat, or the dusted jacket still holding the smell of horse sweat. Her eyes had flicked to his hand, the ring glinting faintly under the moonlight. He looked down at it, at the symbol of promises made on a Sunday morning long ago when the church bells rang and a preacher's voice filled his chest with certainty. Back then he believed love was simple. Work hard, stay loyal, pray when times got hard. But the years had changed him. And maybe, he thought bitterly, love was never simple to begin with. Behind him, the barn creaked with the night breeze. The horses shuffled inside, restless. He could hear the faint laughter from the saloon down the road, distant and hollow, like echoes of a life he no longer fit into. She took a step closer, the sound of her boots soft in the dirt. "You can't love two people, not truly," she said. Not when one of them's still holding on to a ghost. He wanted to argue, to tell her that marriage wasn't just about love but duty, about weathering what life threw. But the truth was, his wife had been gone from his heart for years, even if her name was still on his lips during prayer. There was no warmth left in that little house by the creek, only cold meals and silence stretching between them like miles of open desert. "Do you think it's that easy?" he asked, his voice low. "No," she said softly. "But maybe it's time you stop pretending it's hard." He looked at her then, really looked. The moonlight caught her face, and for a moment he saw something vulnerable there, a flicker of fear, or maybe hope. Her hands trembled slightly, though she tried to hide it. This wasn't about stealing a married man's heart. It was about freeing her own. He pulled in a long breath, feeling the weight of the night press down on him. He could hear his heartbeat louder than the crickets now. His hand went to the ring, the metal warm from his skin. For years he'd never taken it off, not even when he washed up in the creek or slept under open skies. It had become part of him, but tonight, under the stars, it felt like the last thing keeping him from breathing free. She watched him, silent, her eyes glistening like river water at dawn. There was something sacred in that quiet, something that made the world beyond the barn disappear. No sounds of cattle, no wind, just two people and a truth too raw to ignore. "I ain't a good man," he said finally. "You know that. You're honest," she said. "That's better than good." He swallowed hard. The ring twisted between his fingers. He thought of the vows he'd made, the life he'd built, the woman he'd once believed he couldn't live without. And yet here he was, living, breathing, wanting something different. "I can't promise you nothing," he murmured. "I didn't ask you to," she said. "Just don't lie to yourself anymore." The wind picked up, carrying the smell of hay and dust. Somewhere far off, a coyote howled. The world seemed to hold its breath as his hand stilled. Then, with a slow, trembling motion, he pulled the ring from his finger. The tiny sound it made, metal sliding against calloused skin, felt louder than thunder. For a heartbeat, he just stared at it, sitting there in his palm, dull and worn, but heavy with years. Then he looked up, met her eyes, and something in both of them shifted. She stepped forward, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her breath. "Now," she whispered, "tell me what that means." He didn't answer. Couldn't. The truth wasn't something that could be spoken yet. All he knew was that his hand felt lighter and his chest somehow heavier. He closed his fingers around the ring and turned toward the open plains. The moon lit the land in silver, and in the distance the church steeple cut against the sky like a blade. He thought of the woman waiting there in that small, quiet house, the wife he'd promised forever to. Would she know somehow that something sacred had broken tonight? Maybe it's too late to go back, he said quietly. Maybe it's not about going back, she said. Maybe it's about starting honest for once. Her words settled into him like dust in still air. There was no anger in her, no judgment, just truth. And yet it terrified him, because honesty had a cost, and he wasn't sure he was ready to pay it. He looked down at the ring one last time before slipping it into the pocket of his worn coat. He didn't throw it away, not yet. Maybe he couldn't. The sound of hooves echoed faintly down the road, someone riding fast, too fast for a quiet night like this. Both of them turned toward the sound, their faces tense. "Who'd be coming this late?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He squinted into the darkness. The rider's silhouette grew closer, the shape of a hat and a long coat flapping in the wind. Something twisted in his gut. He knew that horse. "That's from the ranch," he said, voice rough. "Something's happened." The rider pulled up hard, dust flying. The horse snorted, breath steaming in the cool air. The cowboy's heart pounded as the figure swung down, boots hitting the ground. "Ben," the rider said, voice shaking. "It's your wife. She's gone." The world stopped. He didn't move, didn't speak. The wind blew through the dry grass, and the barn groaned softly behind them. She looked at him, eyes wide, searching his face for what would come next, but he couldn't look at her. His hand went to his coat pocket, feeling the cold metal pressed against the fabric. The ring he'd just taken off seemed to burn through the cloth, heavy with everything he didn't yet understand. And in that moment, under the cold moon of Willow Creek, the night that began with a whisper ended in silence, leaving only the question neither of them dared to ask. Had love just set him free? Or cursed him forever? The wind picked up, carrying the scent of dust and sage across the fields as the words settled between them like a storm that hadn't yet broken. "She's gone." Those two words tore through the cowboy's chest with a force he didn't expect. He didn't move at first. His hand stayed in his coat pocket, clutching the cold metal of the ring like it could still hold time in place. The woman beside him, her face pale under the moon, didn't say a word. She knew better than to speak when a man's whole world had just come undone. The rider's voice was still unsteady. They found the door open, horse still saddled outside. No sign of her anywhere. He paused, glancing toward the woman, then back at the cowboy. There were tracks leading toward the creek. "Sheriff's out looking now." The cowboy's throat tightened. "Tracks?" The rider nodded. "Boot prints. One set." He exhaled slowly, the night pressing in on him. "Could be she just went walking," he said, more to himself than anyone. The rider shifted uneasily. "Not in this dark. Not without her lantern." The woman stepped back a little, her gaze flicking between the two men. The wind lifted her hair, brushing it across her cheek. "You should go," she said quietly. "Find her." He turned toward her, eyes filled with something she couldn't name. Fear, guilt, maybe both. "You think I don't want to?" "I think you're scared of what you'll find," she whispered. He didn't answer. The truth stung because it was too close. He pulled his hat down low and swung himself onto his horse without another word. The other rider turned and followed as they galloped into the open dark, hooves thundering across the plain, the sound fading until only the crickets dared fill the silence again. She stood there a long while, staring after them. The stars looked cold that night, and for the first time since she'd come to Willow Creek, she felt the ache of something she couldn't name, regret maybe, or the realization that she had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The cowboy rode hard through the night, the air cutting sharp against his face. Every hoofbeat echoed with the thought he didn't want to face. What if she knew? He'd left before sundown, told his wife he was heading out to check the north pasture. He'd said it plain without guilt, the way a man tells any small lie he's gotten used to. But if she'd followed him, if she'd seen where he'd gone. When he reached the creek, the moonlight turned the water into ribbons of silver. He jumped down and crouched low, studying the soft mud along the bank. The rider held the lantern close. There were footprints just as he'd said. Small ones pressed deep, leading toward the bend where the current ran strong. He followed them, his boots sinking into the earth. The prints stopped near the edge. He scanned the ground, his chest tightening when he saw something glinting faintly near a stone. A piece of cloth, torn, tangled in the grass. He knelt and picked it up. It was the hem of her shawl, the one she wore every evening when the air turned cold. He turned it over in his hand, mud clinging to the faded blue fabric. She could have slipped, the rider said quietly. The creek's high tonight. The cowboy didn't answer. He stood there, still as stone, his mind running through everything he hadn't said, every silence that had stretched too long between them. He had loved her once, truly. But love had turned into something quieter, something buried under the weight of long days, unspoken words, and the kind of loneliness that doesn't look like loneliness until it's too late. He turned his eyes toward the horizon, where the first faint line of dawn was breaking. "We'll search downriver," he said, voice rough. They followed the creek for hours, calling her name, but the wind swallowed every sound. When the sun rose, painting the land in pale gold, there was still no sign of her, no boot prints, no shawl, no body. By the time they rode back into town, word had spread. The sheriff was waiting outside the general store, his face drawn tight. A small group of townsfolk gathered nearby, whispering in low voices. The woman from the barn watched from the far end of the road, hidden behind the old blacksmith's fence. She could see the cowboy's shoulders slump as he dismounted, his face gray with exhaustion and something darker, something close to despair. The sheriff stepped forward. "We'll keep looking," he said, though his tone carried little hope. "Creek runs deep this time of year." The cowboy nodded, but his eyes were somewhere far away. He felt the weight of every stare, every question no one dared ask. His wife gone, his hands muddy, his heart divided. That night the saloon was quiet. Even the piano sat untouched. The townsfolk spoke in murmurs, not wanting to be caught speaking too loud about what everyone already knew. The woman from the hills sat near the back, her hands folded tight in her lap. She could feel the tension twisting through the air like smoke. A man at the bar whispered, "You ask me." She didn't just wander off. "Folks don't vanish without a reason." Another nodded. "He was seen riding out last night, wasn't he? Maybe she found out something she shouldn't have." The first man leaned closer. Wouldn't be the first time a rancher's troubles got buried quiet under the prairie. Their laughter was thin and cruel. The woman stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. The sound turned heads, but she didn't care. She walked out into the cool night, heart pounding. She didn't go home. Instead, she found herself wandering toward the barn again, the place where it had all begun. The air was thick with hay and old memories. His hat still hung on a nail near the door, and the faint smell of smoke lingered from the fire they'd built hours before the world fell apart. She sank onto a bale of hay, pressing her hands to her face. For the first time, she felt the full weight of what they'd done, not in sin, but in the quiet breaking of something sacred. She had wanted honesty, but not like this. Outside, she heard the faint creak of the door and froze. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. She turned and saw him standing there, shadows cutting across his face. His eyes looked hollow, his shirt still damp from the morning mist. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. "Neither should you," she replied. He closed the door behind him, leaning against it. For a long time, neither spoke. The silence between them felt heavier than words. "She's gone," he said finally, his voice breaking. "No trace, no sign. Sheriff thinks the current took her." The woman swallowed hard. "Do you believe that?" He shook his head slowly. "No. She wasn't the kind to run, and she wasn't careless." She hesitated, then said, "Do you think she knew? About us?" His eyes flicked up sharp and weary. "If she did, she never said. But maybe she didn't need to." The wind moaned through the cracks in the wood. He looked around the barn, as if the walls themselves held secrets. "There's something that don't fit," he murmured. "Tracks by the creek stopped too clean. No drag marks, no stumble. It's like she vanished into the air." She frowned. "You think someone took her?" He didn't answer right away. "I don't know what to think anymore." The oil lamp on the shelf flickered, casting a thin, trembling light across his face. She saw the fear there, the kind of fear that comes when a man starts doubting everything, even himself. "People are talking," she said softly. "They think—" "I know what they think," he cut in, voice sharp. "They think I did it." The silence that followed was cold and merciless. "I didn't," he said finally, his tone softer now, almost pleading. "But I was there last night, and I took off my ring before it happened." "That's all they'll need." She stood, moving closer. "Then tell them the truth." "What truth?" he asked, meeting her eyes. That I was with another woman while my wife disappeared? She didn't reply. The truth sounded damning even in her own mind. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing. Something ain't right here. I can feel it. Maybe someone wanted her gone. Maybe someone wanted me blamed. Her heart thudded. Who'd want that? He turned toward the door, his eyes narrowing. There's one way to find out. She stepped forward. You're not going after her alone. He looked back, weary but determined. You don't understand. If the sheriff catches me out there, I'll hang before I find anything. Then I'll come, she said. If we find her or what's left of her, I want to know too. He hesitated, then nodded once. Before sunrise, then. Meet me by the North Trail. She watched him leave, his shadow long against the fading lantern light. When the door shut behind him, the barn went quiet again. Outside, the wind carried the faint sound of the creek, restless and endless. Somewhere beyond those hills, the truth waited, buried under mud, moonlight, and the echoes of promises broken. And as dawn crept closer, neither of them knew that what they would find come morning wouldn't just test their hearts, but uncover a secret. Willow Creek had been hiding for years. The first pale streaks of dawn had barely touched the sky when the woman reached the North Trail. The ground was cool beneath her boots, damp from the night mist that still clung to the sagebrush. A thin fog rolled low across the valley, and in the distance the faint outline of the cowboy appeared, his horse waiting beside him. He stood still, staring toward the horizon as if searching for something that might make sense of the night before. When she approached, he didn't turn right away. His hands rested on the saddle, knuckles white, eyes hollow from sleeplessness. You came, he said quietly, as though half expecting she wouldn't. I said I would, she replied. Someone has to help you find the truth before the town decides it for you. He nodded slowly. They already have. They rode together in silence for a while, the sound of hooves soft against the dirt. The rising sun painted the plains in shades of gold, yet neither felt warmth in it. The air was thick with unspoken things, guilt, fear, questions that hung between them like dust that refused to settle. They followed the creek's curve north, where the land rose into the foothills. The water ran rougher here, breaking over stones and branches. The cowboy slowed his horse, scanning the banks carefully. Every shadow looked like a sign, every broken twig a clue. There, the woman said suddenly, pointing toward a patch of mud where something had caught her eye. He dismounted and knelt beside it. A deep print half washed out, pressed into the earth. Not a boot, too narrow. A wagon wheel had cut through the mud nearby. She might have been taken, he muttered. Or she went with someone. The woman frowned. Who'd she go with at that hour? He didn't answer. His thoughts were running faster than his words. Only one wagon had passed through the area in recent days. The preacher's. He'd come by their place 2 nights before, saying he'd been visiting families west of town. The cowboy hadn't thought much of it then, but now that memory stuck in his throat like a splinter. They followed the faint tracks until they met the main road, where the mud turned to dust and all signs vanished. He kicked at the ground in frustration. Tracks end here. Then we look for who's missing, she said. Somebody knows something. Back in town, the day had begun in uneasy quiet. Folks pretended to go about their work, but every eye turned when the cowboy rode past. Mothers gathered their children close. Men nodded stiffly but didn't speak. Rumors had already taken root like weeds. At the sheriff's office, he tied up his horse and stepped inside. The sheriff sat behind his desk, eyes heavy from a night without sleep. You shouldn't be riding off alone, he said. Not when folks are starting to wonder. Wonder what? The cowboy asked. You know damn well, the sheriff said, leaning back. They think maybe this wasn't an accident. That maybe she found out something she wasn't supposed to. The cowboy clenched his fists. You think I hurt her? I think people talk, the sheriff said evenly. And right now you ain't helping yourself by sneaking around. I'm trying to find my wife, the cowboy said, voice shaking with anger. That's more than anyone else is doing, the sheriff sighed. You find something, you come to me first. Understand? He nodded stiffly and turned to leave. But as he did, he noticed a piece of paper pinned to the wall, a list of riders and wagons that had passed through town the last few days. His eyes stopped on one name, Preacher Ellsworth. Left Willow Creek heading west just before dawn yesterday. Outside, he told the woman what he'd seen. She frowned. You think the preacher's involved? He shook his head slowly. I don't know. But he was the last one to talk to her, and he left town the same night she disappeared. They rode west, following the rutted path that led through the valley. The sun was climbing higher now, beating down hard on the dry earth. They stopped once at a stream to rest their horses. The woman filled her canteen and glanced at him. If he did take her, and why? He stared into the water, seeing nothing but the reflection of his own guilt. Maybe she told him something. Maybe she was leaving me. Would she? He hesitated. She had reason to. The woman didn't push further. There was truth in his eyes, but also pain too raw to touch. By noon, they reached a small abandoned cabin by the ridge. The place looked quiet, but smoke curled faintly from the chimney. The cowboy motioned for her to stay back, then approached the door. It creaked open under his hand. Inside, the air smelled of burnt wood and damp cloth. A coat hung on a peg near the fire, plain gray, the kind a preacher might wear. "Someone's here," the woman whispered from behind him. A noise came from the next room, a floorboard creaking, slow and deliberate. The cowboy's hand went to his revolver, though he didn't draw it yet. Then a voice came, soft and familiar. "I was wondering when you'd find me." He froze. His wife stepped into view, her hair undone, her dress torn at the sleeve. She looked tired but unharmed. Her eyes met his, unreadable. The woman behind him gasped quietly, but his wife didn't seem surprised to see her. She only looked between them, the corner of her mouth lifting into something close to a bitter smile. "So," she said, "you found each other after all." The cowboy's throat went dry. "What happened to you?" "They said that I was gone?" She interrupted. "I was, but not lost." She walked past him, her steps calm. "The preacher helped me, told me to get away before the town turned their gossip into truth." He blinked, confused. "What gossip?" She turned sharply. "You think people didn't see you sneaking out every night? Think I didn't hear the whispers when I walked through town?" Her voice cracked, but her gaze stayed steady. "I didn't run because I was scared. I ran because I needed to see if you'd come looking, or if you'd just go back to her." Silence filled the cabin. The woman shifted uneasily near the door, guilt twisting through her chest. The cowboy tried to speak, but no words came. His wife's eyes were shining now, not with tears, but with something colder. "You took off your ring," she said. "I saw you that night. You didn't know I followed you." The air between them grew heavy. He could hear his heartbeat echoing in his ears. "Then why come here?" he asked softly. "Because I needed to know who you were without me," she said. "And now I do." Before he could answer, a loud crack split the silence, the sound of a gun outside. All three turned toward the door. The woman's voice trembled. "Who else knows we're here?" The cowboy moved to the window, peering through the narrow crack. A shadow shifted between the trees, tall, broad, moving fast. Another gunshot followed, closer this time. "Get down," he hissed. They ducked as a bullet shattered the window, spraying glass across the floor. The horses outside whinnied in panic. His wife clutched his arm, eyes wide. "Who's shooting?" He didn't know. Maybe it was someone from town, someone who'd decided he was guilty before the sheriff could. Or maybe it was something else, someone who didn't want the truth found at all. He crawled toward the door, gun drawn now, heart pounding hard. The woman grabbed his sleeve. "Don't go out there." "I have to," he said, voice tight. He pushed the door open and stepped out onto the porch. The light was harsh, blinding after the dark cabin. He scanned the trees, the dry grass shifting in the wind. Nothing moved. Then a voice came from behind a boulder near the stream. "You should have stayed quiet, cowboy." The sound was familiar, but he couldn't place it. The man stepped into view, a face he knew from town. One of the ranch hands from the next property over. "What are you doing here?" The cowboy called out. "Just finishing what you started," the man said, lifting his rifle. The cowboy dove for cover as another shot rang out, splintering wood beside his head. Inside, the two women screamed. He fired back once, the sound echoing across the valley. When the smoke cleared, the man was gone. Only the echo of hoofbeats faded into the distance. He stood there breathing hard, dust and sweat clinging to his face. Behind him, his wife stepped outside, trembling. "He said finishing what you started." What did he mean by that? He looked at her, but he didn't have an answer. Maybe the man believed the rumors. Maybe someone had paid him. Or maybe the truth was buried deeper than any of them knew. The woman from the hills came out next, eyes darting between them. "We can't stay here," she said. "He'll be back," he nodded. "We ride at night. But first, we need to find out who's pulling the strings in Willow Creek." The three of them stood in uneasy silence as the wind swept across the plains, carrying with it the faint echo of a church bell from miles away. None of them spoke, but they all felt it, the sense that the real danger hadn't even begun yet. And as the sun dipped low behind the hills, the cowboy slipped the ring from his pocket, staring at it in his hand. It no longer looked like a promise. It looked like a warning. Night came down over Willow Creek like a blanket of smoke, thick and restless. The sky burned red along the horizon before slipping into darkness, and the air felt strange. Too still, too quiet. The cowboy led the two women through the narrow trail behind the ridge, their horses moving slow to keep from making noise. The only sound was the low rustle of the grass and the creak of old leather. He hadn't spoken much since the gunfire that morning. Every word felt heavy like a stone too large to lift. The woman from the hills rode a few paces behind, her eyes scanning the trees, her hand resting close to the rifle across her lap. His wife rode beside him, her face pale in the moonlight. She hadn't cried. She hadn't even looked at him since they left the cabin. The silence between them said more than words ever could. When they reached a rise overlooking the valley, he stopped. The lights of Willow Creek flickered faint in the distance, warm, steady, and full of the people already whispering his name with suspicion. Somewhere in that quiet town, someone was pulling the strings, someone who wanted his family broken and his name buried. He turned to the women. "We'll rest here." "No fires," the woman from the hills nodded, sliding down from her horse. She tied the reins loosely to a bush and walked a few steps away, watching the road below. His wife dismounted more slowly, moving stiffly, her dress catching on the saddle. He watched her, torn between wanting to speak and fearing what she might say. Finally he managed, "You cold?" She shook her head, arms crossed. "Not colder than I've already been." The words hit him harder than he expected. He looked away. The prairie wind moved through the grass with a low hum, the kind that made the night feel alive. "We can't keep running forever," the woman from the hills said, her voice low. "Whoever that man was, he'll come back with more." He nodded. "That's why we'll go to the mines at Black Hollow. No one goes there anymore. We can lay low till we figure out what this is." His wife frowned. "And then what? Spend the rest of our lives hiding in holes." He met her gaze. "You got a better plan?" Her eyes softened, just for a moment. "Find the truth. The real one." He studied her in the dim light, realizing how much she'd changed. The fear he'd once seen in her was gone. What replaced it was something steadier. Determination, maybe. Or a fire she'd kept hidden for years. "We will," he said quietly. "But it won't be easy." They slept little that night. Every crack of branch or whisper of wind sounded like danger creeping closer. When dawn came, they packed and rode out again, heading north toward Black Hollow. The trail was rough and narrow, winding through the canyons where echoes carried for miles. By midday, the sun bore down hard. Dust rose with every hoofbeat clinging to their skin. The cowboy's eyes burned from lack of sleep, but his mind stayed sharp, turning over every memory of the last few weeks. Something about it all didn't fit. The preacher leaving town so suddenly, the gunmen knowing exactly where they'd be, and the missing wagon they'd followed into the hills. None of it was coincidence. When they reached the entrance to Black Hollow, the air turned cooler. The old mining site stretched out before them, its buildings half collapsed, the wooden shafts leaning like bones. Crows circled overhead, their cries echoing through the empty valley. "This place gives me chills," the woman from the hills said. "That's why it's safe," the cowboy replied. "No one'll come looking here." They led the horses into one of the old storage sheds. The roof sagged, but it was dry. Inside, the air smelled of dust and rusted metal. They set up what little they had, a blanket, a lantern, a canteen of water. His wife sat near the doorway, staring at the valley below. "You ever think," she said after a long silence, "that maybe this ain't about us? Maybe we're just caught in someone else's fight?" He glanced at her. "Like who?" She shrugged slightly. "Your boss, maybe. Or the folks who've been trying to buy up land near the creek. There's been talk for months." The woman from the hills nodded. "She's right. The railroad men been coming through, making promises to the big ranchers. Anyone that don't sell gets pushed out one way or another." The cowboy frowned. "You think that's what this is about? Someone trying to run us off? Or ruin your name so you can't fight back," she said. "If the sheriff believes you killed your wife, your land goes to the bank. Easy way to take what's yours." The thought hit him like a hammer. It made too much sense. The missing wife, the rumors, the gunfire. Someone wanted to make sure he was out of the way. "We need proof," he said. "Then we find it," his wife replied. Her voice was steady, almost calm. "I ain't running anymore." They stayed hidden until nightfall, then set out again, heading back toward Willow Creek under cover of darkness. The town lights grew larger as they approached, but so did the danger. If anyone saw them, they'd be hunted down before sunrise. The woman from the hills knew a back road that led behind the churchyard. They tied up the horses near the fence and crept through the shadows. The sheriff's office was dark, but light flickered in the saloon across the street. Inside, laughter and voices spilled through the open windows. "Stay low," the cowboy whispered. They moved toward the general store. Through the window they could see two men inside, the sheriff and the ranch foreman. "The same man who'd hired him years ago. Can you hear what they're saying?" his wife whispered. He shook his head, creeping closer to the window until their voices carried just enough. "Got the papers ready," the foreman was saying. "Once he's declared wanted, we can file the claim. The land'll be ours by the end of the week," the sheriff sighed. "You sure about this? Folks'll talk when they find out she's alive." "She won't be," the foreman said coldly. "My man missed this morning, but he won't next time." The cowboy's stomach turned to stone. The pieces fell into place all at once. The attack, the rumors, even the preacher's wagon. It was all part of a plan to take his land and bury the truth with him. He backed away from the window, jaw clenched. His wife looked at him, her eyes wide. "You heard?" He nodded. "Every word." The woman from the hills touched his arm. "We can take this to the sheriff's log. There'll be proof there." "Not with him watching," he said. "We'll wait till they leave." They hid behind the church until the saloon quieted and the last lamps went out. When the sheriff finally stumbled home, the cowboy moved first, crossing the street with careful steps. The door to the office was locked, but he pried it open with his knife. Inside, the air was thick with tobacco and old paper. He found the ledger on the desk, filled with neat handwriting, land transfers, names, signatures. There it was, his own property listed under pending reassignment, signed not by him but forged with his name. He felt a wave of anger so fierce it shook his hands. His wife placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. "You have what you need," she whispered. "Now let's go before—" The sound of boots outside froze them all. The woman from the hills blew out the lantern, plunging the room into darkness. They pressed against the wall, hearts pounding. The door creaked open. Light from a lantern spilled across the floor. A shadow stepped in, the foreman. He was alone, gun drawn, eyes sharp. "I knew you'd come back," he said softly. "You just couldn't leave well enough alone." The cowboy straightened slowly, the forged papers still in his hand. "You tried to kill my wife. You framed me," the foreman smirked. "I did what needed doing. The railroad don't wait for fools who can't see what's coming." His wife stepped forward, voice trembling but fierce. "You think you can steal everything from us and call it business?" The foreman's eyes flicked toward her, then back to the cowboy. She should have stayed gone. Before the cowboy could move, the man raised his gun. The shot rang out, shattering glass and silence alike. The woman from the hills cried out, ducking low. The cowboy lunged forward, tackling the foreman. They hit the ground hard, the gun skidding across the floor. A second later, another shot fired, wild, deafening. For a moment, everything was noise and chaos. Then, silence. The foreman's lantern had fallen, its flame licking up the spilled whiskey on the floor. Fire caught fast, curling up the wall, lighting the papers ablaze. Smoke filled the room. "Get out!" the cowboy shouted. His wife grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the door. The woman from the hills followed, coughing hard as they stumbled into the street. Behind them, the sheriff's office roared with fire, sparks shooting into the night sky. The foreman didn't follow. His body lay still inside, the papers gone up in flames with him. The cowboy stood in the street, staring at the fire, knowing that the one thing that could prove his innocence was turning to ash. The townsfolk began to stir, opening doors, shouting. He turned to his wife, smoke curling around them. "They'll think I did this too." She looked at him, her face streaked with ash and fear. "Then we run, until we can make them listen." Behind them, the church bell began to ring, sharp and echoing through the valley. The sound carried far, cutting through the night like a warning. And somewhere out beyond the plains, a second rider was coming fast, the real puppet master behind it all, bringing with him the final reckoning that none of them were ready for. The fire from the sheriff's office burned through the night like a restless spirit, casting an orange glow that spread across the heart of Willow Creek. People poured into the street, shouting, pointing, trying to make sense of what had happened. The cowboy, his wife, and the Apache woman stood at the edge of town, their faces lit by the flames. The wind carried the smell of smoke and fear. Everything they'd fought for was now turning to ash. The cowboy's heart pounded in his chest as he turned toward the dark hills beyond the valley. He knew there wasn't time to explain, not with half the town already thinking him guilty. His wife gripped his arm, her eyes filled with both exhaustion and courage. She didn't need to say a word. He could see the choice in her face. They would run again, but this time not in fear. They would run toward the truth. The three of them moved quickly, keeping to the back roads until the glow of the fire faded behind them. By dawn, they reached the edge of the canyon that marked the old Apache boundary. There, they stopped to rest. The cowboy's hands were torn and blistered, his clothes covered in soot. His wife wrapped her shawl around his shoulders, even though she was shivering herself. "We lost the papers," he said quietly. "It's gone, all proof of what they did." The Apache woman shook her head. "Not all. Some truths can't burn." She reached into her saddlebag and pulled out a small folded map, one that bore the stamp of the railroad company. "Found this while you were fighting him. It's signed by the foreman and the company man in Tucson. It's proof they plan to take every farm near the creek." The cowboy stared at it, disbelief mixing with relief. "You held on to this the whole time?" "I figured we'd need it when the fire started," she said with a faint smile. His wife took the map and looked over it carefully. "This can clear your name, maybe even save the town from them." He looked at both women, the weight of the past days pressing down on him. "If we can get it to someone who'll listen." "The governor's man in Prescott," the Apache woman said. "He's been fighting the railroad too. If we reach him, he'll make it right." So they rode, three souls against the dust and heat, carrying the last thread of truth through the wild country. The road stretched long and empty, cutting through land that still held the memory of old wars and forgotten promises. Coyotes cried at night, and the stars burned cold above them. As they rode, the cowboy found himself remembering the first time he came west. Back then he'd been full of hope, young, strong, certain the land would shape him into something better. But now he realized the land didn't make men good or bad. It just revealed what was already there. The railroad men had greed in their hearts, and greed spread faster than any fire. But he still believed that decency, simple, quiet decency, could stand its ground, even against men like them. When they reached Prescott after 2 days of hard riding, they were worn to the bone. The small town sat quiet in the afternoon sun, the courthouse rising above the dusty streets. The cowboy tied up his horse, then turned to his wife. "You sure about this? Once we hand that over, we can't turn back." She met his eyes, steady and sure. "We already turned back once. Didn't do us no good." They walked together into the courthouse, the Apache woman close behind. The man they sought was there, a government clerk who had heard rumors of the railroad schemes but never had proof. When he saw the documents, his expression changed from suspicion to concern. "This is serious," he said, scanning the map. "If this is real, those men could face trial. And your land, your name will be cleared." The cowboy nodded. "That's all we ask." It took weeks for word to travel back to Willow Creek, but when it came, it brought the weight of justice. The foreman's death forced the railroad's hand, and the papers the cowboy carried exposed the corruption that had taken root in the town. The sheriff was removed from office. The preacher's wagon, once a mystery, was found to have been used to move stolen documents for the company. Piece by piece, the truth came to light. When the cowboy and his wife returned to Willow Creek, the people met them differently this time. There were no whispers, no suspicious glances. Even the men who had once avoided his gaze now tipped their hats as he passed. The land that had nearly cost them everything was theirs again, not through power but through persistence. They rebuilt the cabin that had been burned in the fight. The Apache woman stayed with them for a time, helping to mend fences and tend to the horses. She never said much, but her presence carried quiet strength. The townsfolk came to respect her, even those who once spoke against her people. In her silence, they found something they'd long forgotten: humility. As the months passed, the town began to change. The railroad plans were halted, and the valley stayed untouched for a while longer. The fields grew again, the river ran clear, and laughter returned to the porch at dusk. The cowboy found peace in the small things: the sound of the wind through the grass, the warmth of his wife's hand, the sight of smoke rising gently from their new chimney. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, he stood outside watching the horizon. The light caught the rim of his hat, turning it gold for a moment before fading into twilight. His wife stepped beside him, her face soft in the glow. "You ever think it's over now?" she asked. He thought for a long moment before answering. Maybe not over, but it's right. That's enough for me. The Apache woman joined them a little later, her horse saddled. I'll be heading back north, she said. My people are waiting. There's still fighting to do up there, but not the kind that needs bullets. He nodded. You'll always have a place here. She smiled faintly. You keep your land safe, cowboy. That's all the thanks I need. They watched her ride off into the fading light, her figure small against the open land. The sky turned deep purple, the stars beginning to show. For the first time in a long while, the cowboy felt the kind of stillness that didn't carry fear. Just peace, the kind that comes after a long storm. In the days that followed, life moved quietly again. The town learned to heal, though scars remained. People spoke of what had happened not with bitterness, but with the kind of awe that comes from surviving something you can't quite name. They told stories about the fire, about the cowboy and the woman who came back from the dead, about the stranger from the hills who'd taught them that silence could be stronger than a gun. Years later, when travelers passed through Willow Creek, they'd sometimes hear the story told around a lantern fire. Some said it was a tale of revenge, others said redemption. But those who truly knew, the ones who'd seen the smoke rise and the lies fall, understood it was something simpler. It was about holding on to truth, even when the world tried to bury it. On quiet nights, when the wind blew soft across the plains, the cowboy would still hear the faint whisper of the Apache woman's words echoing through the hills. Don't look away, and he never did. Not from the past, not from the land, not from the lessons he'd paid dearly to learn. He stayed, rooted like the cottonwoods by the creek, his hands calloused but steady, his heart finally still. The railroad never returned to Willow Creek. The town remained small, unremarkable to most who passed through, but to those who called it home, it was sacred ground, a place that had once burned, and then been reborn through courage and truth. In the end, the cowboy didn't become rich or powerful. He didn't want to. All he wanted was a quiet life, the kind where each sunrise meant another chance to set things right. And in that, he found something worth more than gold or glory. Because sometimes justice doesn't come fast or clean. Sometimes it comes slow, through ash and loss, carried by the hands of those who refuse to give up. And when it does, it leaves behind something lasting, a story worth telling, a lesson worth keeping. So when the wind swept through the valley, whispering across the grass, the folks of Willow Creek said it sounded like her voice still lingered there, reminding them all of what it took to make things right again. And though the world kept changing beyond the hills, in that small, quiet corner of the West, truth still had a home.